I'll never forget the moment I realized I had won. It wasn't when the judge ruled in my favor, or when I finally moved out of our Lake Oswego home. It was on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in my modest Southeast Portland apartment, 6 months after Jim had served me divorce papers. I was sipping coffee, scrolling through my emails, when I saw it. Jim's name in my inbox with the subject line, "We need to talk." The message was brief. "Becca, heard about Emerald Innovations' contract with Westwood. That's a $4 million deal. How long have you been hiding this? Call me." My hands didn't shake as I read it. Instead, a strange calm washed over me, accompanied by the faintest smile. For 8 years, Jim Parker had controlled every aspect of our marriage, our finances, our social circle, even the business we supposedly built together. When he blindsided me with divorce papers after my MS diagnosis, he'd meticulously planned to leave me with nothing. What he never discovered during our marriage was that for 5 years, I'd been quietly building something of my own, something that now dwarfed the company he'd taken from me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jim had always underestimated me, treating my contributions to Parker Design Solutions as insignificant, just a supportive wife helping her brilliant husband. He never bothered to look beyond the surface, never questioned why I spent so many late nights catching up on work. If he had, he might have discovered Emerald Innovation Group, the company I'd founded under my maiden name, Morgan. I closed his email without responding. 6 months earlier, I would have immediately called him back, anxious to explain myself, desperate for his approval. But that version of Rebecca Morgan no longer existed. She had disappeared the day I sat in Dr. Levine's office, listening to him explain my multiple sclerosis diagnosis while Jim typed away on his phone, half listening. "It's manageable," Dr. Levine had assured me. "With proper treatment and lifestyle adjustments, many patients lead full, active lives with minimal progression." Jim had finally looked up from his phone. "How long until she recovers completely?" The doctor's expression had softened with practiced patience. "MS is a chronic condition, Mr. Parker. There's no complete recovery, but..." "So she'll always be sick? Unable to work normally?" Jim had interrupted, his tone shifting from disinterest to sharp concern. That was the first moment I saw it, a flash of calculation in his eyes. Not concern for my well-being, but assessment of my value, like a business asset being reevaluated after unexpected depreciation. 2 weeks later, as I adjusted to my new medication regimen and researched everything I could about managing MS, Jim grew increasingly distant. More late nights at the office, more business trips, fewer conversations about our shared business, Parker Design Solutions. Then came that Thursday morning. I'd woken up feeling stronger than I had in weeks, ready to return to work. Jim had already left for the office, or so I thought. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard the front door open. "Jim, did you forget something?" I called out. Instead of Jim, a courier appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding a thick manila envelope. "Rebecca Parker?" he asked, consulting his tablet. "Yes, that's me. Please sign here." I signed, puzzled, and opened the envelope after he left. Inside were divorce papers, already signed by Jim. Not just standard divorce papers, pages of detailed claims about business assets, property divisions, and financial arrangements that overwhelmingly favored him. Most shocking was his claim to sole ownership of Parker Design Solutions, the UX design firm we'd built together over 6 years. According to Jim's filing, I had been minimally involved in the business, serving in an administrative capacity, without strategic input. The petition characterized my role as supportive spouse rather than business partner, despite my name on all founding documents and my position as chief creative officer. I sat at our kitchen island, Papers spread. Before me, a strange numbness replacing what should have been shock or anger. It was the culmination of a pattern I'd willfully ignored for years. Jim systematically diminishing my contributions, isolating me from client relationships, gradually removing me from critical decisions. What Jim didn't know, what he had never bothered to discover, was that 3 years into our marriage, I had recognized this pattern. Rather than confront him, I had made a different choice. I began building something separate, something mine. With seed money inherited from my grandmother, funds Jim knew nothing about, I founded Emerald Innovation Group, specializing in emerging interface technologies that Parker Design Solutions wasn't exploring. I operated under my maiden name, maintained a separate client base, and worked during hours Jim was traveling or networking. Tom Richardson, an early mentor who had grown disenchanted with Jim's business practices, joined me as a silent partner and advisor. We kept the operation lean, reinvesting most profits, slowly building a reputation for innovative solutions that larger firms weren't providing. Now, staring at divorce papers clearly designed to leave me with nothing, I felt an unexpected clarity. This wasn't the end Jim had planned for me. It was the liberation I hadn't known I needed. I reached for my phone and called the one person I knew would understand both the personal and professional implications of my situation. Olivia Chen. Liv, it's Becca. I need a lawyer. Today, if possible. Olivia, a law school friend who had built a reputation handling complex divorces involving business assets, didn't waste time with platitudes. What happened? Jim filed for divorce. Courier just delivered papers. He's claiming full ownership of Parker Design Solutions. A brief silence. And Emerald Innovation? Olivia was one of the few people who knew about my separate business. She had helped structure it to keep it legally distinct from any marital assets. Not mentioned. I don't think he knows. Keep it that way, she said immediately. Don't respond to him directly. Don't sign anything. I can see you at 4 today. After hanging up, I took a deep breath and did something that would have been unthinkable before. I called Zoe Williams, our office manager at Parker Design Solutions. Becca, are you feeling better? We've missed you around here. Zoe, I need you to be completely honest with me. Has Jim been making changes at the office? Moving accounts? Reassigning my clients? Her hesitation told me everything. He said you'd approved all the changes while focusing on your health. What changes exactly, Zoe? He's reassigned all your clients to himself or Derek. He's moved your files out of the main server, and she lowered her voice. He had me cancel your company credit cards 2 weeks ago. Said it was a security precaution while you were away. 2 weeks ago, before my diagnosis was even confirmed. Zoe, I need a favor. Can you send me the backup, files of all my work? Not through the company server, to my personal email. Becca, I could get fired. I know. And I wouldn't ask if it weren't important. That work represents 6 years of my career. Jim's filed for divorce, Zoe. He's trying to erase me from the company. Another pause. I'll do it tonight after everyone leaves. I thanked her, knowing this small act of loyalty might cost her job, but would provide essential evidence of my contributions to the company. Next, I called my sister Sarah, the only family member who lived nearby. Can I stay with you for a few days? I need to move some things out of the house while Jim's at work. Sarah didn't ask questions. I'll be there in an hour with my SUV. By the time Jim returned from work that evening, I had removed my most important possessions, personal documents, and the hidden backup drive containing all my Emerald Innovation work. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter beside a note with just 3 words: contact my lawyer. When I met with Olivia that afternoon, her sleek downtown office felt like a different world from the craftsman home in Lake Oswego where I'd lived for the past 8 years. She reviewed Jim's filing with a practiced eye, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. He's been planning this for months, she said finally, setting down the papers. The detailed financial arrangements, the narrative about your role in the business. This wasn't drafted overnight. I know, I said quietly. I think he started planning it as soon as my health issues began. Olivia leaned forward, her expression serious. Becca, this is going to get ugly. Jim's claiming not just marital assets but your professional identity. He's trying to erase your contributions to build a case against your ownership stake. What about Emerald Innovation? Is it protected? Yes, as long as you've maintained clear separation, separate accounts, no commingling of funds, distinct client base. Have you? I nodded. Completely separate. Different bank, different clients, different business model. Tom Richardson is the only person who crosses over, and he's been careful to maintain confidentiality. Good. Then here's my advice. We fight hard on Parker Design Solutions to establish your rightful ownership stake, but we keep Emerald Innovation completely off the radar. Not a word about it in any filing or negotiation. Why not use it as leverage? Olivia shook her head. Because right now, Jim thinks he's leaving you with nothing. People get careless when they think they've won. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let's keep it that way while we build our case. The strategy made sense. Jim's overconfidence had always been his blind spot. There's one more thing, I said. I've been documenting everything for years. Emails where Jim takes credit for my work, calendar invites showing client meetings I led, even recordings of presentations where he introduced me as my wife who helps with the creative stuff, when I was actually the lead designer. Olivia's eyebrows rose. You've been preparing for this. Not consciously, I admitted. But I think part of me always knew who Jim really was, even when I couldn't admit it to myself. She nodded. That documentation will be crucial. Now, about your medical condition. I don't want to use that, I interrupted. I don't want to be portrayed as a victim or have my MS used as leverage. This is about my professional contributions and legal rights. Olivia studied me for a moment, then smiled. Most clients come in here wanting blood. You're thinking strategically. I like that. She closed her folder. Let's get to work. The next week was a blur of activity. I moved into Sarah's guest room, applied for new credit cards under my maiden name, and transferred my personal accounts to a bank Jim had never used. I contacted Dr. Levine to ensure my medical records remained private and scheduled follow-up appointments under my maiden name. Meanwhile, Olivia filed a response to Jim's divorce petition, carefully countering his claims about Parker Design Solutions without revealing anything about Emerald Innovation. She requested full financial disclosure, knowing Jim would likely try to hide assets or undervalue the company. 10 days after receiving the divorce papers, I finally returned to Emerald Innovation's small office in the Pearl District. Tom Richardson met me there, concern evident in his weathered face. You should have told me sooner, Becca. I would have helped. I needed time to process everything, I explained, settling into my chair. Besides, you've already helped more than you know. When you suggested I keep this business completely separate from my marriage, it seemed unnecessary. Now I understand why. Tom had been in the industry for 30 years. He'd seen partnerships dissolve, marriages crumble, and businesses get torn apart in the aftermath. His caution had seemed excessive 3 years ago. Now it looked like prescience. What's your next move? He asked. I opened my laptop, pulling up a proposal we'd been working on for months. Westwood Technologies. It's time to submit our final bid. Tom's eyebrows rose. Are you sure? That's a major commitment. With everything going on? With everything going on, I need to secure Emerald's future more than ever, I said firmly. This contract would put us in a different league. And honestly, Tom, I need to focus on building something, not just fighting to keep what I've already earned. He nodded slowly. All right, let's review the proposal one more time. The Westwood contract represented everything Emerald Innovation stood for: innovative interfaces for complex systems, accessibility-focused design, and cutting-edge user research. It was work I truly believed in, not just a client Jim had pursued for the prestige or billing potential. As we refined the proposal late into the evening, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in months. My marriage was ending, my health was uncertain, and my former business was being stolen from me. But here, in this small office with industrial windows streaked with Portland rain, I was still creating something valuable. Something mine. 2 days later, Jim made his first attempt at direct contact, showing up at Sarah's house unannounced. "Becca, this is ridiculous," he said when I reluctantly answered the door. "Why are you hiding out here? Come home so we can discuss this like adults." "I'm not hiding, Jim. I'm living separately during divorce proceedings on advice of counsel. Any discussions should go through Olivia." His expression darkened. The charm that had once seemed so genuine now looked mechanical, a mask he could put on or remove as needed. "You're making a mistake letting lawyers get involved. I'm trying to be fair here." "Fair?" I repeated, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "You filed for divorce without warning, tried to take a business we built together, and cut off my access to all our accounts. Which part of that strikes you as fair?" Parker Design Solutions was always my company, Becca. You know that. There. It was. The revisionist history, stated with such confidence he probably believed it himself. "My name is on the founding documents, Jim. I designed our most successful projects. I managed our creative team." He sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "Look, I'm willing to be generous in the settlement. You need support, especially with your under condition. But dragging this out will just deplete the very assets we're arguing over." Translation: "Take what I offer now, because I'll make sure there's nothing left if you fight me." "All communications through my lawyer," I repeated, then closed the door. Later that evening, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Vanessa Taylor. We need to talk about Jim." Vanessa Taylor. The name was vaguely familiar, someone Jim had mentioned from industry events. I showed the text to Sarah. "Google her," my sister suggested. The search results were illuminating. Vanessa Taylor, 32, marketing director at a firm that had frequently partnered with Parker Design Solutions. There were several photos of her at industry events, including one from 3 months ago showing her standing suspiciously close to Jim, his hand resting just a bit too comfortably on her lower back. "Well," Sarah said dryly, "that explains some things." I didn't respond to the text. Whatever Vanessa wanted to tell me, confession, justification, or some attempt to establish the narrative, wouldn't change my approach. This wasn't about Jim's infidelity. It was about what I had built and what was rightfully mine. The next morning, Olivia called with news. "Jim's attorney has requested an emergency hearing to freeze all marital assets, claiming you've been withdrawing funds. They're specifically targeting your personal account at First Regional." My stomach dropped. That account contained the initial operating funds for Emerald Innovation's fiscal quarter. "Can they do that?" "They can try, but we'll fight it. More importantly, this suggests they're fishing for information about your finances. Have you moved money recently?" "Just my personal savings from our joint account to my individual account. Nothing related to Emerald." "Good. Keep it that way. And Becca, they're getting aggressive quickly. That usually means they're worried." After hanging up, I immediately called Michael Grayson, the financial advisor who handled Emerald Innovation's accounts. "We need to secure our operating capital," I explained. "Move everything from First Regional to our backup account at Pacific Northwest Bank, today, if possible." "That's a substantial transfer to process without advance notice," Michael cautioned. "I understand, but it's urgent. My ex-husband is trying to freeze accounts he shouldn't even know about. Within hours, the funds were transferred. It was the first proactive step in what I was beginning to understand would be a complex chess match. Not just about dividing what Jim and I had built together, but protecting what I had built on my own. That evening, as I worked late at Emerald's office, my phone rang with a Portland area code I didn't recognize. "Rebecca Morgan," I answered, using my maiden name deliberately. "Ms. Morgan, this is Martin Chen from Westwood Technologies. I wanted to personally let you know that we've reviewed all submissions for our interface redesign project, and Emerald Innovations' proposal has been selected. Congratulations." The Westwood contract, $4 million over 2 years. The kind of stable, prestigious client that would cement Emerald's reputation and secure our future. "That's wonderful news, Mr. Chen. We're excited to work with Westwood. Your approach to accessibility integration was particularly impressive. Most firms treat it as an add-on. You built it into the foundation of the design." "That's been our philosophy from the beginning," I said, feeling a surge of pride. This was work Jim had never touched, never influenced, never tried to claim as his own. After the call, I sat in the quiet office, watching Portland's lights glimmer through the rain-streaked windows. For the first time since receiving those divorce papers, I felt something beyond determination or clarity. I felt triumph. The Westwood contract wouldn't just secure Emerald Innovations' future. It would transform us from a promising boutique firm to a serious player in the industry. The same industry where Jim had spent years ensuring everyone saw me as just his wife who helped out. I hadn't planned to keep Emerald Innovations secret during our marriage. In the beginning, it was simply a side project, something creative. That was just mine. As it grew, I had tried to tell Jim several times, but he had always dismissed my attempts to discuss independent work. "You've got enough on your plate with Parker Design," he'd say. Or, "Let's focus on building our business," before starting something new. Our business, as if it had ever truly been ours in his mind. The secrecy that had started as a response to his dismissal had become a strategic advantage. While Jim had been carefully positioning to leave me with nothing, I had been building something he couldn't touch. Not legally, not creatively, not professionally. I called Tom to share the good news about Westwood, then composed a carefully worded email to Olivia. She needed to know about this development in case it affected our legal strategy, but we had to ensure the information stayed contained. 3 days later, Jim's attorney requested a settlement conference, a surprising pivot from their previously aggressive stance. Olivia was suspicious. "Something's changed their calculation," she said during our prep meeting. "Either they've discovered a vulnerability in their position, or they're setting up for something else." "Could they have found out about Emerald?" I asked. "Possibly, though it wouldn't change the legal merits of your claim to Parker Design. Still, be prepared for them to bring it up." The settlement conference was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Olivia's office. I spent the weekend preparing, reviewing financial documents, practicing responses to likely questions, and finalizing the structure for Emerald's new Westwood project. Work had become both my refuge and my ammunition. Tuesday morning arrived, with Portland's typical spring drizzle. I chose my outfit carefully, a tailored charcoal suit that projected confidence without ostentation, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back simply. Nothing that would reinforce Jim's narrative of me as a decorative accessory to his success. Olivia met me in the lobby of her building. "Ready?" I nodded, feeling strangely calm. More than ready. As we rode the elevator to her office suite, she gave me one last piece of advice. "Remember, this isn't about punishing Jim or proving your worth. It's about securing what's legally yours. Stay focused on the end game." "I understand," I said. Strategic, not emotional. The elevator doors opened to reveal Jim and his attorney, Jason Bennett, already waiting in the reception area. Jim looked up, his expression shifting from practiced neutrality to momentary surprise as he took in my appearance. Perhaps he'd expected the softer, more accommodating version of me he'd grown accustomed to controlling. I gave him a brief professional nod, then followed Olivia to the conference room without breaking stride. As we settled around the polished table, I placed my portfolio precisely in front of me, back straight, hands folded. Jim sat across from me, attempting to catch my eye with looks ranging from conciliatory to impatient. I kept my gaze fixed on Bennett or Olivia, denying him the emotional engagement he sought. "Thank you all for agreeing to this conference," Bennett began smoothly. "We believe an equitable resolution can be reached without prolonged litigation, which would benefit neither party." Olivia smiled thinly. "We're certainly open to equitable solutions. However, Mr. Parker's initial filing suggested a very different approach." Bennett cleared his throat. "Initial positions often evolve as proceedings continue. My client is prepared to modify several key provisions." He slid folders across the table. Inside was a revised settlement proposal that still heavily favored Jim, but made minor concessions: a slightly larger cash payment, continued health insurance coverage, and a small ownership percentage in Parker Design Solutions, though without voting rights or operational involvement. "As you can see," Bennett continued, "Mr. Parker is being quite generous, considering Ms. Parker's limited role in the business and her need for ongoing support given her medical situation." I felt a flicker of anger at the condescension, but kept my expression neutral. Olivia reviewed the document with practiced indifference. "This is certainly a starting point," she said, "though it fails to acknowledge my client's integral role in building Parker Design Solutions from the ground up. Ms. Morgan," she emphasized my maiden name deliberately, "was not only a founding partner but the creative force behind the company's most successful projects." Jim shifted uncomfortably at Olivia's use of my maiden name. It was a small but significant reminder that I existed before him and would continue to exist after him. "We have extensive documentation of Ms. Morgan's contributions," Olivia continued, extracting a thick folder from her briefcase. "Client testimonials specifically praising her work, project timelines showing her leadership role, and financial records demonstrating how the company's growth correlated directly with projects she spearheaded." She passed copies to Bennett, who flipped through them with forced casualness. Jim leaned over to examine the documents, his jaw tightening as he recognized client names and projects. "Additionally," Olivia said, "we have communications from Mr. Parker himself acknowledging Ms. Morgan's critical role." She slid forward printed emails where Jim had praised my work to clients or in team settings, directly contradicting his current claims. Bennett and Jim exchanged glances. This was clearly more evidence than they had anticipated. "These historical contributions don't necessarily translate to current operational value," Bennett argued. "The company's strategic direction and client relationships are primarily managed by Mr. Parker." "Are they?" Olivia asked mildly. "Our understanding is that several major clients specifically requested Ms. Morgan's involvement in their projects. In fact, we've prepared a financial analysis showing the revenue generated by client relationships she cultivated versus those Mr. Parker brought in." She produced another document, this one showing that projects I had originated or led accounted for 58% of the company's revenue over the past 3 years. Jim finally broke his silence. "Those clients came to Parker Design because of our reputation, a reputation I built." "A reputation built on work I created," I countered, speaking directly to him for the first time. "The Anderson campaign, the Lighthouse project, the Turner redesign, all my work, Jim. Work you took credit for while introducing me as your wife instead of your business partner." Bennett placed a warning hand on Jim's arm, but Jim shook it. "Off. If you were so essential, why did clients barely notice your absence these past few months?" "Because you deliberately kept me isolated from them for years," I replied evenly. You made sure they knew you, not me, regardless of who actually did the work. Jim's expression darkened. You're overvaluing your contribution. The business succeeded because I built the relationships, secured the financing, and created the strategy. You provided support, valuable support, but not equal partnership. I allowed myself a small smile. Is that why the Brennan Group specifically requested me for their rebrand last year? Or why Lowell Industries wrote in their testimonial that my design approach was the deciding factor in choosing Parker Design? Jim's jaw tightened further. He hadn't expected me to have this level of documentation or to present it so calmly. Bennett tried to regain control of the conversation. Regardless of past contributions, the current question is how to equitably divide marital assets moving forward. My client is willing to revise certain terms, but the fundamental structure of the settlement must acknowledge operational realities. The fundamental structure, Olivia replied, must acknowledge that Parker Design Solutions was built by both parties. Ms. Morgan is entitled to not just financial compensation, but recognition of her ownership stake and ongoing rights to the business she helped create. The negotiations continued for nearly 3 hours, with incremental movement from Jim's side, but nothing approaching what Olivia and I considered fair. Throughout the session, I maintained my composure, speaking only when necessary and always with focused precision rather than emotional appeals. As the meeting concluded without resolution, Bennett suggested a follow-up conference the following week. My client needs time to consider the documentation you've presented and consult with his financial advisors. Translation: they needed to regroup and develop a new strategy. As we gathered our materials, Jim made one last attempt to speak with me privately. Becca, can we talk for a moment? Just us? Any communication should go through our attorneys, I replied, echoing the boundary I'd established from the beginning. This doesn't have to be so adversarial, he insisted, lowering his voice. I'm trying to be fair here, especially given your health situation. I looked at him directly, seeing with perfect clarity the manipulation that had once seemed like concern. My health situation isn't relevant to what I built and what I'm legally entitled to. And Jim? I added as I turned to leave. You might want to discuss with your attorney how the court will view your timing, filing for divorce 2 weeks after my diagnosis. His face flushed, confirming what I'd suspected. He hadn't told Bennett about the suspicious timing, likely presenting a more sympathetic narrative about a marriage that had naturally run its course. As Olivia and I rode the elevator down to the lobby, she gave me an approving nod. You did well in there, stayed focused, didn't take the bait. What happens next? They'll come back with a revised offer, probably still inadequate, but better than today's. Meanwhile, we keep building our case. She paused. There's something else you should know. I have a contact at Bennett's firm who says they've been making inquiries about other businesses in your name. My stomach tightened. They're looking for Emerald. They suspect something. They don't have confirmation yet, but Jim's telling them you couldn't possibly have accepted the settlement offer because you have another source of income they don't know about. I considered this development as we exited the building. The drizzle had stopped, leaving Portland's streets glistening under clearing skies. Does this change our strategy? I asked. Not fundamentally. We continue pushing for your fair share of Parker Design Solutions regardless of any other assets you may have. But she gave me a significant look. It might be time to consider when and how to reveal Emerald. On our terms, not theirs. I nodded, understanding her implication. The secret business I'd built was no longer just protection against Jim's betrayal. It was becoming a strategic asset in our legal chess match. The question wasn't if Jim would discover Emerald innovation, but when and how that revelation would occur. As I walked to my car, I felt my phone vibrate with an incoming email. It was from Westwood Technologies, confirming our initial project kickoff meeting for the following Monday. The timing seemed significant, a reminder that regardless of what happened with the divorce proceedings, I was building something valuable that existed completely separate from Jim and our shared past. For the first time since receiving those divorce papers, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. Jim had been so focused on taking everything from me that he'd never bothered to discover what I'd been building on my own. His narrow vision, seeing me only as I fit into his life rather than as a whole person with separate ambitions, had become his biggest blind spot. That evening, as I reviewed project notes for Emerald's upcoming work with Westwood, I received a text from an unknown number. It was short, but unmistakably from Jim. Emerald Innovation. Impressive. So he knew. I set down my phone without responding, curious about what would come next. The revelation didn't trigger panic or even concern, merely a calculated readjustment to the ongoing chess match between us. 20 minutes later, as if on cue, my phone rang with Jim's number. "Hello, Jim," I answered calmly. "Were you ever going to tell me?" he asked, his voice a mixture of anger and something else, perhaps genuine surprise. "About Emerald?" I tried to several times. "You weren't interested in my little side projects, as you called them." A pause. $4 million with... "Westwood isn't a little side project, Becca." "No, it isn't," I agreed. "It's the result of 3 years of work you knew nothing about because you never bothered to ask what I was doing when you were too busy for me." Another pause, longer this time. "We need to talk about this, not through lawyers." "There's nothing to discuss, Jim." Emerald Innovation was founded with non-marital assets, operates under my maiden name, and has been meticulously separated from our joint finances since inception. It's not part of the divorce proceedings. "You've been planning this," he said, accusation replacing surprise. "All this time, I've been building something of my own because you made it clear I would never be an equal partner in what we supposedly built together," I interrupted. "It wasn't about planning for divorce. It was about having something that was truly mine." The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of realizations coming too late. "I underestimated you," he finally said, his tone unreadable. "Yes," I agreed simply. "You did." Most shocking was his claim to sole ownership of Parker Design Solutions, the UX design firm we'd built together over 6 years. According to Jim's filing, I had been minimally involved in the business, serving in an administrative capacity without strategic input. The petition characterized my role as supportive spouse rather than business partner, despite my name on all founding documents and my position as chief creative officer. I sat at our kitchen island, papers spread before me, a strange numbness replacing what should have been shock or anger. It was the culmination of a pattern I'd willfully ignored for years. Jim systematically diminishing my contributions, isolating me from client relationships, gradually removing me from critical decisions. What Jim didn't know, what he had never bothered to discover, was that 3 years into our marriage, I had recognized this pattern. Rather than confront him, I had made a different choice. I began building something separate, something mine. With seed money inherited from my grandmother, funds Jim knew nothing about, I founded Emerald Innovation Group, specializing in emerging interface technologies that Parker Design Solutions wasn't exploring. I operated under my maiden name, maintained a separate client base, and worked during hours Jim was traveling or networking. Tom Richardson, an early mentor who had grown disenchanted with Jim's business practices, joined me as a silent partner and advisor. We kept the operation lean, reinvesting most profits, slowly building a reputation for innovative solutions that larger firms weren't providing. Now, staring at divorce papers clearly designed to leave me with nothing, I felt an unexpected clarity. This wasn't the end Jim had planned for me. It was the liberation I hadn't known I needed. I reached for my phone and called the one person I knew would understand both the personal and professional implications of my situation. Olivia Chen, Liv, it's Becca. I need a lawyer, today, if possible. Olivia, a law school friend who had built a reputation handling complex divorces involving business assets, didn't waste time with platitudes. What happened? Jim filed for divorce. Courier just delivered papers. He's claiming full ownership of Parker Design Solutions. A brief silence. And Emerald Innovation? Olivia was one of the few people who knew about my separate business. She had helped structure it to keep it legally distinct from any marital assets. Not mentioned, I don't think he knows. Keep it that way, she said immediately. Don't respond to him directly. Don't sign anything. I can see you at 4 today. After hanging up, I took a deep breath and did something that would have been unthinkable before. I called Zoe Williams, our office manager at Parker Design Solutions. Becca, are you feeling better? We've missed you around here. Zoe, I need you to be completely honest with me. Has Jim been making changes at the office? Moving accounts? Reassigning my clients? Her hesitation told me everything. He said you'd approved all the changes while focusing on your health. What changes exactly, Zoe? He's reassigned all your clients to himself or Derek. He's moved your files out of the main server and... She lowered her voice. He had me cancel your company credit cards 2 weeks ago. Said it was a security precaution while you were away. 2 weeks ago, before my diagnosis was even confirmed. Zoe, I need a favor. Can you send me the backup? Files of all my work? Not through the company server, to my personal email. Becca, I could get fired. I know. And I wouldn't ask if it weren't important. That work represents 6 years of my career. Jim's filed for divorce, Zoe. He's trying to erase me from the company. Another pause. I'll do it tonight after everyone leaves. I thanked her, knowing this small act of loyalty might cost her job, but would provide essential evidence of my contributions to the company. Next, I called my sister Sarah, the only family member who lived nearby. Can I stay with you for a few days? I need to move some things out of the house while Jim's at work. Sarah didn't ask questions. I'll be there in an hour with my SUV. By the time Jim returned from work that evening, I had removed my most important possessions, personal documents, and the hidden backup drive containing all my Emerald Innovation work. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter beside a note with just 3 words: contact my lawyer. When I met with Olivia that afternoon, her sleek downtown office felt like a different world from the Craftsman home in Lake Oswego, where I'd lived for the past 8 years. She reviewed Jim's filing with a practiced eye, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. He's been planning this for months, she said finally, setting down the papers. The detailed financial arrangements, the narrative about your role in the business. This wasn't drafted overnight. I know, I said quietly. I think he started planning it as soon as my health issues began. Olivia leaned forward, her expression serious. Becca, this is going to get ugly. Jim's claiming not just marital assets, but your professional identity. He's trying to erase your contributions to build a case against your ownership stake. What about Emerald Innovation? Is it protected? Yes, as long as you've maintained clear separation, separate accounts, no commingling of funds, distinct client base. Have you? I nodded. Completely separate. Different bank, different clients, different business model. Tom Richardson is the only person who crosses over, and he's been careful to maintain confidentiality. Good. Then here's my advice. We fight hard on Parker Design Solutions to establish your rightful ownership stake, but we keep Emerald Innovation completely off the radar. Not a word about it in any filing or negotiation. Why not use it as leverage? Olivia shook her head. Because right now, Jim thinks he's leaving you with nothing. People get careless when they think they've won. Let's keep it that way while we build our case. The strategy made sense. Jim's overconfidence had always been his blind spot. There's one more thing, I said. I've been documenting everything for years. Emails where Jim takes credit for my work, calendar invites showing client meetings I led. Even recordings of presentations where he introduced me as my wife who helps with the creative stuff when I was actually the lead designer. Olivia's eyebrows rose. "You've been preparing for this?" "Not consciously," I admitted. "But I think part of me always knew who Jim really was, even when I couldn't admit it to myself." She nodded. "That documentation will be crucial. Now, about your medical condition." "I don't want to use that," I interrupted. "I don't want to be portrayed as a victim or have my MS used as leverage. This is about my professional contributions and legal rights." Olivia studied me for a moment, then smiled. "Most clients come in here wanting blood. You're thinking strategically. I like that." She closed her folder. "Let's get to work." The following morning, I woke to 5 missed calls from Jim and a string of increasingly agitated text messages. 6:45 p.m. "Where are you? We need to talk about this." 8:12 p.m. "You can't just leave like this. I'm trying to be reasonable." 9:37 p.m. "Taking your things? Really? This is childish, Becca." 11:02 p.m. "Your lawyer called. This is unnecessary. We can work this out directly." "How 15 a.m.? I'm freezing our joint accounts until you agree to meet. This doesn't need to get messy." His final message confirmed what I had already anticipated. Jim would use financial pressure as his first tactic. Fortunately, I had prepared for this possibility. The night before, after meeting with Olivia, I had transferred a portion of our joint savings to a new account in my name only, enough to cover immediate living expenses and legal fees. It wasn't about taking more than my share. It was about ensuring I could function during what would clearly be a contentious divorce. I forwarded Jim's messages to Olivia with a brief note. "Financial pressure starting. Already secured funds for basic expenses." Her response came minutes later. "Perfect. Don't engage directly. I'm filing for temporary support orders today. Will request expedited hearing." The next week was a blur of legal preparations and practical adjustments. Sarah helped me find a small apartment in Southeast Portland, affordable enough that I could maintain it even if the divorce proceedings dragged on. I scheduled appointments with my new neurologist, set up a separate health insurance policy, and began the process of disentangling my life from Jim's. Meanwhile, I continued managing Emerald Innovation remotely, being careful to use only my personal devices and secure connections. Tom stepped up admirably, handling in-person meetings and client visits while I focused on design work and strategic planning. The company's operations remained completely separate from the divorce proceedings, exactly as Olivia had advised. 10 days after receiving the divorce papers, I received notice of a temporary orders hearing scheduled for the following week. Olivia explained that these orders would establish interim financial arrangements while the divorce proceeded, including potential access to joint accounts and temporary support payments. "Jim will fight this," she warned. "He's already told his attorney that you absconded with joint funds and are refusing to communicate." "I have documentation of every penny I transferred," I assured her. "And his text messages prove he's the one who threatened to freeze accounts." The day before the hearing, Jim made his first serious attempt to contact me directly, showing up at Sarah's house unannounced. I had already moved to my apartment, but he apparently tracked down my sister's address through mutual friends. Sarah called me immediately. "Jim's here, insisting on speaking with you. I told him you don't live here, but he doesn't believe me." "Don't engage with him," I advised. "Call the police if he won't leave." "He's already gone," she said. "But he left something, a settlement offer he called it. Wants you to review it before tomorrow's hearing." I picked up the envelope from Sarah's that evening. Inside was a handwritten proposal outlining terms that were marginally better than his initial filing, but still grossly unfair. A lump sum payment that represented maybe 15% of our joint assets, 6 months of health insurance coverage, and no ownership stake in Parker Design Solutions. In exchange, I would agree to a non-compete clause preventing me from working in digital design in the Pacific Northwest for 3 years. The non-compete was the tell. Jim might suspect I was working on something independently, but he clearly didn't know about Emerald Innovation specifically. If he had, the non-compete would have been much more targeted. I sent a photo of the proposal to Olivia with a brief message. Jim's latest offer. Note the non-compete clause. Interesting, she replied. He's fishing. Bring this to the hearing. Tomorrow. The next morning, I dressed carefully for court, a conservative navy pantsuit that projected professionalism rather than seeking sympathy. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that gave everything a slightly harsh glow. Jim and his attorney, Jason Bennett, were already seated when Olivia and I arrived. Jim looked up, his expression a carefully composed mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. I nodded politely, but took a seat as far from him as the small courtroom allowed. Judge Harriet Monroe, a woman in her 60s with short silver hair and sharp eyes, entered promptly at 9 a.m. After the formalities, she turned directly to the issue at hand. I've reviewed the filings from both parties regarding temporary financial arrangements, she began. Ms. Morgan Parker is requesting continued access to joint accounts and temporary maintenance during the pendency of this divorce action. Mr. Parker opposes this request on the grounds that Ms. Morgan Parker has already improperly removed funds from joint accounts. Is that an accurate summary? Bennett stood. Yes, Your Honor. My client is concerned about the unauthorized transfer of significant sums from joint accounts immediately after divorce papers were served. Olivia rose next. Your Honor, my client transferred reasonable living expenses only after Mr. Parker explicitly threatened to freeze accounts, which he subsequently did. We have documentation of both the transfers, which represented less than 20% of joint liquid assets, and Mr. Parker's threatening messages. She presented copies of Jim's texts and bank statements showing exactly what I had transferred and when. The judge reviewed them carefully. Mr. Bennett, did your client send these messages? Bennett conferred briefly with Jim. My client acknowledges sending messages expressing concern about financial management during a difficult time, but maintains that the unilateral transfer of funds was inappropriate. Judge Monroe's expression made it clear she wasn't impressed with this characterization. Ms. Chen, does your client have independent income at present? No, Your Honor. Until recently, she was fully integrated in the couple's joint business, Parker Design Solutions, where she served as Chief Creative Officer. Mr. Parker has subsequently removed her from operations and canceled her company credit cards, effectively cutting off her professional income. Is this correct, Mr. Bennett? Bennett shifted uncomfortably. My client made necessary operational adjustments in light of Ms. Morgan Parker's health issues and extended absence. My client's medical condition did not prevent her from continuing her professional duties, Olivia countered. She was deliberately excluded from the business as part of Mr. Parker's divorce strategy. The judge turned to me directly. Ms. Morgan Parker, are you currently able to work despite your medical diagnosis? Yes, Your Honor, I replied. My condition is being managed with medication, and my doctors have placed no restrictions on my professional activities. She nodded, then returned to the documents before her. After a few moments, she looked up. Here's my ruling on temporary orders. Joint accounts are to be unfrozen immediately, with both parties having access. Neither party may make withdrawals exceeding $5,000 without written consent from the other or court approval. Mr. Parker will continue providing health insurance coverage for Ms. Morgan Parker until the divorce is finalized. Ms. Morgan Parker shall have immediate access to her office and work materials at Parker Design Solutions. She paused, looking directly at Jim. Mr. Parker, the court takes a dim view of using financial pressure as leverage in divorce proceedings, particularly when health issues are involved. Any further attempts to restrict Ms. Morgan Parker's access to joint assets or her professional workspace will be considered in final property distribution. The judge's ruling was a significant first victory, establishing that Jim couldn't simply cut me off financially or professionally while the divorce proceeded. As we left the courtroom, Jim approached, ignoring Olivia's presence. "That was unnecessary. Becca," he said, his voice low but tense. "You're turning this into a battle when I'm trying to be generous." "Your definition of generous needs work," I replied calmly. "And all communications should go through our attorneys." "You've changed," he said, his expression hardening. "The Becca I knew wouldn't have done this." I met his gaze steadily. "The Becca you knew finally saw clearly who she was dealing with." As he walked away, Olivia touched my arm lightly. "Well done. First round to us. But this is just the beginning." She was right. The temporary orders were merely the first skirmish in what would become a complex legal battle. Over the next few weeks, Jim's approach shifted from outright financial pressure to more subtle tactics. Since he couldn't prevent me from accessing Parker Design Solutions' office, he reorganized the workspace, moving my desk to a small side room and reassigning my team members to other projects. When I arrived for my first day back, Zoe met me. At the door, her expression apologetic. "I'm so sorry, Becca. He announced the changes yesterday. Said it was to minimize disruption while the ownership structure is being resolved." "It's okay, Zoe," I assured her. "This isn't your fault." My new workspace was clearly designed to isolate and diminish me, a converted storage room with no windows and minimal furnishings. My name had been removed from the company website and marketing materials. Client calls were being routed away from me, and team meetings were scheduled when I had medical appointments. Rather than fight each individual slight, I documented everything meticulously, following Olivia's advice to build a comprehensive record of Jim's attempts to undermine my position. Meanwhile, I focused my productive energy on Emerald innovation, working from my apartment or coffee shops, careful to keep this work completely separate from Parker Design. 3 weeks after the temporary orders hearing, Olivia received Jim's formal discovery requests, detailed demands for financial information, including all bank accounts, income sources, and business interests. "He's fishing for Emerald," Olivia confirmed as we reviewed the documents. "These requests are much broader than standard discovery in a divorce case." "Do we have to disclose it?" I asked. "Eventually, yes. Full financial disclosure is required in divorce proceedings. But timing matters. We'll respond to these requests accurately but minimally. Meanwhile, we need to prepare for when Emerald does come to light." The discovery phase of the divorce became increasingly contentious. Jim's legal team requested extensions, misplaced documents we sent, and generally employed delay tactics. Simultaneously, we received reports that Jim was transferring Parker Design assets to new corporate entities and restructuring client contracts, classic preparations for hiding business value. Olivia responded by filing motions to compel full disclosure and requesting forensic accounting of Parker Design's finances. The legal maneuvering was expensive and exhausting, but necessary to protect my interests. Throughout this period, I maintained my focus on Emerald Innovation's growth. The timing of the Westwood Technologies proposal couldn't have been better. It represented a significant opportunity to establish the company's reputation in enterprise-level UX design. Tom and I worked nights and weekends refining our pitch, incorporating cutting-edge accessibility features that larger design firms typically treated as afterthoughts. 5 weeks into the divorce proceedings, we received the news. Emerald Innovation had been selected for the Westwood contract, beating out several established firms including, ironically, Parker Design Solutions, which had also bid on the project. Tom called with the news while I was reviewing yet another set of discovery requests from Jim's attorneys. "We got it, Becca. $4 million over 2 years with option to extend. Westwood sending the contracts tomorrow." The victory was sweeter than I could have imagined. Not only was Emerald securing its financial future, but we had directly competed against Jim's company and won. Perhaps most satisfying was knowing that Jim had no idea he had just lost a major contract to his soon-to-be ex-wife's company. That satisfaction was short-lived. 3 days after signing the Westwood contract, I received an urgent call from Olivia. Jim's attorneys just filed an emergency motion claiming you've been concealing business assets. They specifically mention Emerald Innovation Group. My stomach tightened. How did they find out? Unclear, but the Westwood deal was announced in Portland Business Journal this morning. Someone must have made the connection. The article was brief but detailed, noting Emerald Innovation's founding date, specialization in accessible interface design, and my role as founder and CEO. It mentioned the company's maiden name and described the Westwood contract as a significant win for the growing Portland-based design firm. "What's our response?" I asked, already mentally adjusting to this new reality. "We file a complete disclosure immediately," Olivia said. "We emphasize that Emerald was founded with non-marital assets, maintains separate operations, and serves different market segments. Most importantly, we document that you've never commingled Emerald's finances with marital assets. And if the judge doesn't agree, then we argue for the value as of the date of marriage plus reasonable appreciation. But Becca, your documentation of separate founding and operations puts us in a strong position." That evening, I received a text from Jim. "Emerald Innovation? Really? We need to talk. Now." I didn't respond directly. Instead, I forwarded the message to Olivia and focused on preparing comprehensive documentation of Emerald's founding and growth. My grandmother's initial investment, the separate bank accounts, the distinct client base, everything that established Emerald as separate from our marital assets. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the interim, Jim escalated his pressure, sending daily messages demanding explanations and making thinly veiled threats about what the judge would think of my deception. I maintained radio silence, knowing any direct communication could be used against me. 2 days before the hearing, Jim changed tactics. He appeared at my apartment unannounced, knocking insistently until I reluctantly answered. 5 minutes, he said before I could speak. Just give me 5 minutes without lawyers. Against my better judgment, I let him in, keeping the door open and staying near it. Jim looked around my modest apartment with barely concealed disdain before turning to me. "So this is where you've been hiding, while secretly running a company you never told me about." "I'm not hiding, Jim, and Emerald isn't a secret. It's a separate business I founded with my inheritance." He laughed bitterly. "Separate, right. While we were married, sharing everything else." "Were we sharing everything?" I asked quietly. "Because from where I stand, you were systematically excluding me from Parker Design while taking credit for my work." His expression hardened. "That's not fair. I built that company." "We built that company," I corrected. "And now you're trying to erase me from it, just like you tried to erase my contributions all along." He paced the small living room, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Look, this has gotten out of hand. The lawyers are draining both our resources. Let's be practical here." I waited, curious where this was heading. "I'm willing to be generous about Parker Design, give you a fair buyout, maybe 30% of current valuation. In exchange, Emerald stays completely yours. No claims from me. Clean break, everyone moves forward." The offer was almost laughable. 30% of Parker Design's value, as determined by Jim, no doubt, in exchange for relinquishing any claim to a company he had no legal right to anyway. "That's not a fair division of what we built together," I said simply. "It's more than fair given the circumstances," he insisted. "I'm being reasonable here, Becca. This MS diagnosis, it complicates things. You need financial security now more than ever." There it was, the thinly veiled reference to my condition as a weakness, a reason I should accept less than I deserved. The same calculation I'd seen in his eyes the day of my diagnosis. My medical condition doesn't diminish my professional contributions or legal rights, I replied, my voice steady. And this conversation is over. Please direct all further communication through Olivia. You're making a mistake, he warned as I opened the door wider. Judges don't look kindly on spouses hiding assets during divorce. I haven't hidden anything. Emerald was founded with separate property, maintained separately, and will be fully disclosed in discovery. Now please leave. After he left, I immediately called Olivia to report the conversation. He offered 30% of Parker Design in exchange for leaving Emerald alone. He's scared, she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. The Westwood contract proves you can succeed without him, which undermines his whole narrative about you being the dependent spouse who contributed minimally to the business. The emergency hearing regarding Emerald Innovation was both tenser and briefer than I had anticipated. Judge Monroe, the same judge who had handled our temporary orders, reviewed the documentation from both sides with her characteristic thoroughness. Bennett argued passionately that my failure to disclose Emerald Innovation earlier constituted deliberate concealment of assets. Your Honor, Ms. Morgan Parker founded this company during the marriage, but kept its existence from her husband and, initially from this court. This raises serious questions about what other assets might be concealed. Olivia countered with precise documentation showing Emerald's founding with my inheritance, separate property under Oregon law, and its complete financial separation from marital assets. Ms. Morgan Parker was under no obligation to disclose Emerald Innovation until formal discovery requests were made, at which point she provided complete information. There has been no concealment from the court. Judge Monroe studied the documents carefully before addressing Jim directly. Mr. Parker, were you aware of your wife's inheritance from her grandmother? Jim shifted uncomfortably. I knew she received some money, yes, but not that she was using it to start a competing business. And did you inquire about how she was using those funds? No, Your Honor. I assumed they were in our joint investments. Did you include those funds in your financial planning or tax preparations for the marriage? No. She handled that separately. The judge nodded, making a note before turning to me. Ms. Morgan Parker, why didn't you inform your husband about Emerald Innovation? I chose my words carefully. I initially tried to discuss the concept with him, Your Honor. He discouraged me from pursuing independent projects, saying I should focus on our joint business. As Emerald grew, it became clear that he wasn't interested in my independent professional development. The company remained separate not out of deception, but because that's how it naturally evolved. After considering both arguments, Judge Monroe delivered her ruling. The court finds that Emerald Innovation Group constitutes separate property, under Oregon law, having been founded with Ms. Morgan Parker's inheritance and maintained without commingling of marital assets. However, the court also finds that any appreciation in value during the marriage may be subject to division as marital property, depending on whether Mr. Parker can demonstrate indirect contributions to that growth. It was a split decision. Emerald itself would remain mine, but Jim could potentially claim some portion of its increased value during our marriage. Given that most of Emerald's growth had occurred in the past year, with the Westwood contract representing its first major success, the practical impact would likely be minimal. As we left the courthouse, I felt a weight lifting. For the first time since receiving those divorce papers, I had concrete legal confirmation that Jim couldn't take everything from me. Emerald Innovation, the company I had built independently, using skills Jim had consistently undervalued, would remain mine. Olivia squeezed my arm as we walked to her car. This is a significant win, Becca. The judge essentially validated everything we've argued about separate property. And given the timing of Emerald's growth, any appreciation Jim might claim will be relatively small. "What's our next move?" I asked. "We press our advantage," she replied with a determined smile. "Jim's narrative about you being a minor contributor is crumbling. It's time to go on the offensive regarding Parker Design Solutions." That evening, as I reviewed the Westwood project timeline in my apartment, I received an unexpected email from Zoe. "Becca, I don't know if this helps, but Jim's been telling clients you left the company voluntarily to pursue personal projects due to health concerns. Several have asked specifically for you, including Brennan Group. They're not happy with the team that replaced you. Just thought you should know. Zoe." I forwarded the email to Olivia with a brief note. Potential leverage with Parker Design. Clients? Her response came within minutes. Absolutely. Client relationships and goodwill are significant business assets. If he's misrepresenting your departure to clients who specifically valued your work, that's actionable. The following morning, I did something I hadn't done since the divorce began. I reached out directly to a Parker Design client. Mark Brennan, the marketing director at Brennan Group, had worked closely with me on their website redesign the previous year. "Mark, it's Becca Morgan. Do you have a few minutes to talk about the Parker Design situation?" "Becca, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Jim told us you'd stepped away for health reasons. How are you?" "I'm managing my condition well, but I need to clarify something. I didn't leave Parker Design voluntarily. Jim and I are divorcing, and he's attempting to exclude me from the business we built together." There was a pause. That explains a lot. The new team doesn't understand our brand voice at all. The latest mock-ups were disappointing. "I'm sorry to hear that. I valued our working relationship." "So what happens now? Are you starting something new?" I hesitated, weighing my options. "Actually, I already have. A company called Emerald Innovation Group, focusing on user experience with particular emphasis on accessibility." "Interesting," Mark said, his tone warming. "We've been considering a mobile app project with accessibility requirements. Maybe we should talk." By the end of the week, I had spoken with 3 former Parker Design clients who expressed interest in working with Emerald Innovation. I was careful not to directly solicit business away from Parker Design. That could create legal complications, but simply clarified my current situation and new venture. These conversations served a dual purpose: building potential client relationships. For Emerald, while documenting the true nature of my professional relationships at Parker Design. Each client who confirmed working directly with me and valuing my creative input strengthened our case for my significant contribution to the company's success. 8 weeks into the divorce proceedings, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. Jim's initial advantage, his careful planning and apparent control of Parker Design, was eroding as evidence of my contributions mounted, and Emerald Innovation's success became public knowledge. His next move revealed his growing desperation. Through Bennett, he proposed a settlement that acknowledged my ownership stake in Parker Design, but would require me to sign a 5-year non-compete agreement covering the entire Pacific Northwest region. Olivia saw through it immediately. "He's trying to neutralize Emerald's threat to Parker Design. The Westwood contract was a wake-up call. He realizes you're not just claiming your share of what you built together. You're becoming a direct competitor." "So we counter?" I asked. "Absolutely. We demand 50% ownership of Parker Design with no non-compete, or a buyout that reflects the true value of your contribution, plus compensation for his attempts to exclude you." The negotiation had fundamentally changed. Jim had begun the divorce process believing he held all the leverage, control of our joint business, superior financial resources, and the advantage of careful planning. Now he faced a former spouse who not only could document her contributions to their shared business, but had independently built a competing firm that was winning major contracts. As we prepared for the next round of settlement discussions, I reflected on how thoroughly Jim had misjudged me. He had seen my MS diagnosis as a vulnerability to exploit, rather than recognizing the resilience that had defined my entire career. He had dismissed my creative contributions while clients specifically sought my expertise. Most fatally, he had never bothered to look beyond the supportive wife role he'd assigned me to discover what I was building on my own. The greatest irony was that if Jim had treated me as a true partner in our marriage and business, Emerald Innovation might never have existed. It was his systematic undermining of my contributions that had pushed me to create something independently, something that now represented my future beyond the divorce. 2 days before our scheduled settlement conference, I received a call from Tom. "Becca, we just got another inquiry from Brennan Group. They want to discuss moving their entire digital portfolio to Emerald." Brennan Group had been Parker Design's second largest client. Their potential departure would represent a significant financial blow to the company and to Jim. "Did they say why?" I asked. "Apparently they've been unhappy with recent work. Mark specifically mentioned wanting to continue working with you." I thanked Tom and immediately called Olivia to discuss how this development might affect our negotiating position. We agreed not to mention the Brennan inquiry directly in the settlement conference, but to use it as background leverage. Jim needed to understand that fighting me could cost him more than just legal fees. The settlement conference was scheduled for 9 a.m. at Olivia's office. I arrived early, reviewing our position and preparing mentally for what would likely be a tense negotiation. Jim and Bennett arrived precisely on time, Jim looking noticeably more strained than in our previous encounters. The confident, controlling husband who had served me divorce papers had been replaced by a man visibly concerned about his future. As negotiations began, the power dynamics were immediately apparent. Bennett opened with a revised offer: 40% ownership of Parker Design Solutions with limited voting rights, and a 3-year non-compete limited to current Parker Design clients. Olivia countered directly: "My client will accept nothing less than 50% ownership with full voting rights and no non-compete, or a buyout equal to 50% of the company's fair market value as determined by independent valuation." Bennett scoffed. "That's completely unreasonable given Ms. Morgan Parker's limited role in business development and client acquisition." "Is it?" Olivia asked mildly, opening a folder containing testimonials from clients specifically praising my work, emails documenting my leadership on key projects, and financial analyses showing that projects I led generated over 60% of the company's revenue in the past 2 years. Jim leaned forward, speaking directly to me for the first time. "Becca, be reasonable. You know I built the client relationships that made those projects possible." "On some of them," I acknowledged, "but not Brennan Group or Tech Northwest or Lowell Industries. Those were my relationships from the beginning." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Jim's face, suggesting he knew about Brennan's potential departure. Bennett attempted to redirect. "Regardless of specific contributions, a 50-50 split ignores the reality that Mr. Parker founded the company and has been its primary public representative." "We founded the company together," I corrected. "And if being the public representative is the standard for ownership, I should note that many clients have expressed dissatisfaction with the work they've received since Jim excluded me from projects." The negotiations continued for nearly 4 hours, with incremental progress toward middle ground. By early afternoon, we had reached a tentative agreement. I would receive a buyout equal to 45% of Parker Design's independently assessed value, with no non-compete restrictions other than a 1-year agreement not to directly solicit current Parker Design clients. As Bennett drafted the preliminary settlement terms, Jim asked to speak with me privately. After a moment's hesitation, I agreed, and we stepped into an adjacent conference room. "I underestimated you," he said without preamble, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "Yes," I agreed simply. "You did. Emerald Innovation. How long have you been planning that?" "It wasn't about planning an exit, Jim. It was about creating something that was truly mine after years of having my contributions minimized." He had the grace to look momentarily abashed. "I never meant to make you feel that way." "Didn't you? You introduced me as my wife who helps with the creative stuff to clients whose entire projects I designed. You took credit for my work in industry panels. You systematically isolated me from client relationships I initiated." Jim stared out the window at Portland's skyline, silent for a moment. "I suppose I did," he finally admitted. "But not consciously. It was just easier that way." "Easier for you," I pointed out. "Not for me." He turned back to face me. "What happens now? With Parker Design losing clients and Emerald growing, we're going to be direct competitors." There was something vulnerable in his question that I hadn't expected, a recognition that the tables had turned completely. The man who had once dismissed my creative contributions was now worried about competing against me in the marketplace. "That depends on you," I said honestly. "I'm building Emerald my way, focusing on work I believe in. If that puts us in competition sometimes, so be it. But I'm not out to destroy Parker Design. I just won't let you destroy what I've built." He nodded slowly, processing this. "The Westwood contract, that must have been in the works for months, while we were still—" "Yes, I pursued it independently because you consistently dismissed the importance of accessibility features, calling them nice-to-haves rather than core design elements." Westwood disagreed. A flicker of professional recognition crossed his face. "You were right about that. We lost 2 pitches recently because our accessibility approach wasn't comprehensive enough." This small acknowledgement of my professional judgment felt strangely significant after years of dismissal. Not that it changed anything about our current situation, but it confirmed what I had always known. Jim had been wrong to undervalue my contributions. "We should get back," I said, gesturing toward the door. "They'll be waiting." As we returned to the main conference room, I felt a curious sense of closure beginning to form. This negotiation wasn't just about dividing assets or establishing financial terms. It was about finally being seen and valued professionally, even if that recognition came too late for our marriage. Bennett had finished drafting the preliminary agreement, which Olivia was reviewing with her characteristic thoroughness. The terms required refinement, but the basic framework was fair. A significant buyout reflecting my contributions to Parker Design, freedom to grow Emerald innovation without restrictive non-competes, and clear timelines for finalizing the divorce. As we prepared to conclude the meeting, Jim made one final request. "I'd like to issue a joint statement to clients explaining Becca's departure from Parker Design. Something professional that acknowledges her contributions without going into personal details." Olivia looked to me for guidance. It was a reasonable request, better than having Jim continue to misrepresent the situation to clients. But I wanted control over how my professional reputation was characterized. "I'll draft something for review," I offered. "Something that respects both our professional reputations while being truthful about the transition." Jim nodded, seeming relieved. For all his flaws, he understood that publicly disparaging me would ultimately harm Parker Design as well, particularly with clients who valued my work. As we departed, Jim extended his hand somewhat tentatively. It was a professional gesture, rather than a personal one, an acknowledgement that we were now business peers rather than spouses. I accepted the handshake briefly, maintaining the same professional distance. "Good luck with Westwood," he said, a complexity of emotions behind. The simple statement, acknowledgement, regret, perhaps a touch of envy. "Thank you," I replied. "Good luck with the Thompson redesign." It was one of Parker Design's major ongoing projects, one I had helped secure before my exclusion. Outside, as Olivia and I walked to her car, she gave me an appraising look. That was remarkably civilized for a high-asset divorce involving competing businesses. "It's not finalized yet," I reminded her. "There's still the valuation process, documentation, court approval." "True, But the tenor has changed. Jim's not fighting to erase you anymore. He's negotiating with someone he now recognizes as a business equal. That's significant progress. She was right. The divorce had evolved from Jim's initial attempt to leave me with nothing to a recognition that I was a formidable professional in my own right. The shift wasn't due to generosity or fairness on his part, but to the reality I had created through Emerald Innovation's success and the evidence of my contributions to Parker Design. The following weeks were consumed with practical matters, financial disclosures, business valuations, and the complex process of disentangling 8 years of married life. The independent valuator assessed Parker Design Solutions at $7 million, meaning my buyout would amount to approximately $1. $66 million, a substantial sum that reflected the true value of what we had built together. Meanwhile, Emerald Innovation continued to thrive. The Westwood project launched successfully, establishing our reputation for innovative, accessible interface design. Brennan Group officially migrated their digital portfolio to Emerald, bringing 2 smaller clients with them. Tom hired 3 additional designers to handle the increased workload, and we moved from our small Pearl District office to a larger space that better reflected our growing presence in Portland's design community. Throughout this period, I maintained a careful separation between the divorce proceedings and Emerald's operations. When colleagues asked about the situation, I kept my responses professional and forward-looking. Jim and I are finalizing our divorce and business separation. I'm focused on building Emerald's future. This approach reflected a conscious choice. I could have framed my story as one of victimhood and triumph over adversity, the woman whose husband tried to leave her with nothing after her MS diagnosis, only to find herself building a more successful company. But that narrative would have kept me tethered to the past, defined by Jim's actions rather than my own vision. Instead, I chose to focus on what I was creating. The divorce was a chapter ending. Emerald Innovation was a story just beginning. 90 days after that initial settlement conference, I sat in Judge Monroe's courtroom for what would be our final divorce hearing. The settlement agreement had been finalized, all disclosures completed, and both parties had signified their acceptance of the terms. All that remained was the judge's official approval. Jim sat with Bennett on the opposite side of the courtroom, dressed in a conservative gray suit that seemed to reflect the solemnity of the occasion. We had communicated only through attorneys since the settlement conference, maintaining the professional distance that had characterized the latter phase of our divorce. Judge Monroe reviewed the settlement documents thoroughly before addressing us. The court has examined the proposed settlement agreement and finds it equitable and in accordance with Oregon law. Are both parties entering this agreement voluntarily and with full understanding of its terms? Jim and I both answered affirmatively. Then I hereby dissolve the marriage of James Parker and Rebecca Morgan Parker, with all property to be divided according to the terms set forth in this agreement. She signed the final decree with a practiced flourish. The divorce is granted. You are both free to move forward with your separate lives. With those simple words, 8 years of marriage officially ended. I had entered that courtroom as Rebecca Parker and would leave it as Rebecca Morgan, reclaiming not just my maiden name, but my independent identity. As we gathered our belongings, Jim approached hesitantly. "Can I talk to you for a moment? Outside?" I glanced at Olivia, who nodded slightly. "I'll wait by the car," she said. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Jim seemed uncertain how to begin. The confident, sometimes domineering man I had married appeared diminished somehow, humbled by the divorce process and the revelations it had brought. "I just wanted to say," he began, then paused, reconsidering his words. "I'm sorry about how this all unfolded. The timing with your diagnosis, the way I handled everything, it wasn't my best self." It was the closest thing to a genuine apology I had heard from him, though it still carried echoes of self-justification. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, neither accepting nor rejecting the apology explicitly. The joint statement to "Clients went out this morning," he continued. "Your version was fair, more than fair, considering everything." I had crafted a simple professional announcement explaining that I had departed Parker Design to focus on Emerald innovation, acknowledging my contributions to Parker Design projects, and expressing confidence in both companies' futures. No mention of the divorce, no hint of the contentious nature of our separation, just a straightforward business communication. "It seemed the most professional approach," I said. "No benefit to either of us in airing private matters publicly." He nodded, seeming grateful for this small mercy. "Good luck, Becca, with Emerald, with everything." "You too, Jim." It was a brief exchange, lacking the emotional drama one might expect from a final divorce conversation. But it reflected the evolution we had both undergone, from spouses in a deteriorating marriage to business professionals who had reached a negotiated settlement. As Jim walked away, I felt no desire to call after him, no lingering questions or unresolved feelings. The marriage was over, the business matters settled, and my path forward clear. Outside, Portland's persistent drizzle had given way to unexpected sunshine, an apt metaphor for the moment. Olivia waited by her car, giving me a questioning look as I approached. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said, surprised to find it was true. "Everything is exactly as it should be." That evening, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment, not to celebrate the divorce, but to mark a new beginning. Sarah was there, along with Tom, Zoe, who had recently joined Emerald after being let go from Parker Design, and a few close friends who had supported me through the divorce process. As we shared wine and conversation, Sarah raised her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings and hidden strengths," she said, catching my eye with a smile. "And to my sister, who built something extraordinary while no one was watching." The toast captured something essential about my journey. The greatest power had come not from confrontation or retribution, but from quiet, consistent building, creating something valuable that was truly mine, while those around me, especially Jim, underestimated what I was capable of. Later, after my guests had departed, I stood by my apartment window looking out at Portland's glittering skyline. My phone buzzed with an email notification, the final paperwork confirming the transfer of Jim's buyout payment. The financial settlement was now complete, the last tangible connection between us severed. I felt an unexpected sense of gratitude, not for Jim or even the settlement, but for the clarity this difficult process had brought. The MS diagnosis that Jim had seen as a liability had actually given me a profound appreciation for focusing on what truly mattered. The divorce he had initiated as a way to discard me had instead liberated me from a marriage where my contributions were consistently undervalued. Most importantly, the business he had tried to take from me had pushed me to build something better, a company that reflected my values and vision, unburdened by the need to accommodate someone who didn't fully recognize my worth. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Emerald Innovation moved into new offices in downtown Portland, a light-filled space with views of the Willamette River and Mount Hood on clear days. We had grown to a team of 12, with specialized departments for user research, interface design, and accessibility implementation. The Westwood project had been successfully completed, earning industry recognition for its innovative approach to accessible design. Most gratifying was the culture we were building, collaborative, respectful, with explicit credit given to each team member's contributions. No one at Emerald would ever experience the systematic diminishment I had faced at Parker Design. On a crisp fall morning, I arrived at the office early to prepare for a presentation to a potential new client. As I set up the conference room, arranging presentation materials and checking the display settings, I felt a deep sense of ownership that went beyond legal documents or financial statements. This company truly reflected who I was professionally, my values, my creative vision, my understanding of what made design truly effective. Tom arrived shortly after, bringing coffee and his characteristic practical optimism. "Ready for the North Star pitch?" he asked, handing me a latte. "More than ready," I replied, taking a grateful sip. Their RFP might as well have been written for us. All that emphasis on adaptive interfaces and inclusive design principles. "I was thinking the same thing," Tom agreed, settling into a chair. 2 years ago, accessibility requirements were buried in the appendices of these documents. Now they're front and center. "The market's catching up to where we've been all along," I observed. "That's an advantage that won't last forever, but it gives us a head start." We reviewed the presentation one final time, making small adjustments to emphasize Emerald's unique approach. As we worked, I was struck by how natural this felt. Leading a company that aligned perfectly with my professional vision, collaborating with colleagues who respected my expertise. The North Star team arrived promptly at 9 a.m., a group of 5 led by their Chief Product Officer, Elena Santiago. After introductions and brief pleasantries, I began our presentation, outlining Emerald's philosophy and approach before demonstrating specific techniques we would apply to their project. Elena interrupted with a question halfway through. "These adaptive interface elements, they're similar to what you implemented for Westwood, correct?" "Yes, though we've refined the approach based on user feedback," I explained, pulling up additional slides to demonstrate the evolution of our methodology. "Impressive," Elena noted. "We actually pursued Parker Design initially based on their reputation, but when we mentioned your Westwood work, they seemed uncomfortable. That led us to research Emerald directly." The comment caught me off guard, an unexpected reminder of my connection to Parker Design in a context where I wasn't thinking about Jim or our shared past at all. "Parker Design has its strengths," I responded diplomatically. "But Emerald was founded specifically to pursue the kind of inclusive design approach your project requires." The presentation continued smoothly, with engaged questions and productive discussion about implementation strategies. By the conclusion, Elena's interest was evident. "This is exactly the perspective we've been looking for," she said, as her team prepared to leave. "You'll have our decision by early next week, but I can tell you now that I'm very impressed with Emerald's approach." After they departed, Tom gave me an approving nod. "You handled that Parker Design reference perfectly. Professional, no hint of the history there. It doesn't serve any purpose to dwell on that connection," I said. "Besides, Emerald is establishing its own reputation now. Eventually, no one will think to make the comparison." That afternoon, I had a follow-up appointment with Dr. Levine to review my MS management. My condition had stabilized with medication and lifestyle adjustments, with no significant progression since the initial diagnosis. The regular checkups were now routine rather than anxiety-provoking, just another aspect of my life to manage conscientiously. "Everything looks good," Dr. Levine confirmed, reviewing my latest test results. "How are you feeling overall? I know the past year has brought significant changes beyond your health management." "I'm doing well," I said truthfully. "Better than I would have expected a year ago. The divorce was difficult, but it led to positive changes professionally and personally." He nodded, making notes in my file. "That's common with major health diagnoses. They often catalyze significant life reassessments. Not everyone navigates those changes as successfully as you have, though." "I had an advantage," I admitted. "I'd already been building something separate, something that mattered to me professionally. When everything else was in flux, that gave me a foundation to build from." After the appointment, I walked through downtown Portland, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the city's familiar energy. A year earlier, I had been reeling from Jim's unexpected divorce filing, facing an uncertain future both medically and professionally. Now, despite the ongoing reality of managing MS, I felt more grounded and purposeful than I had in years. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. Lunch tomorrow to celebrate 6 months of freedom? I smiled at her phrasing. Sarah had never particularly liked Jim, though she'd kept her reservations mostly private during our marriage. Since the divorce, she'd been openly supportive of my independent path, celebrating each milestone in Emerald's growth as a personal victory. Definitely, I replied. The usual place at 12:30? As I continued walking, my phone rang with an unknown number. Normally, I might have let it go to voicemail, but something prompted me to answer. Rebecca Morgan. Ms. Morgan, this is Vanessa Taylor. The name registered immediately. The woman Jim had apparently been involved with during our marriage. I had seen her name on texts during the divorce proceedings but had never spoken with her directly. What can I do for you, Ms. Taylor? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. I'm calling about a professional matter, she said, her voice carefully composed. I've recently left my position at MarketSphere to start an independent marketing consultancy. Several colleagues suggested I reach out to you regarding potential collaboration opportunities. It was the last thing I had expected, a professional overture from the woman who may have been involved with my ex-husband while we were still married. That's an interesting proposition, I said cautiously. What type of collaboration did you have in mind? My focus is strategic marketing for tech-oriented clients. From what I've observed of Emerald Innovations' work, there could be natural synergies. Your firm designing interfaces and experiences, mine developing the marketing strategy to promote them. Her proposal was logical from a purely business perspective. Such collaborations were common in our industry, but the personal complication was impossible to ignore. Ms. Taylor, Vanessa, I appreciate your professional interest, but I think we should acknowledge the elephant in the room. Your relationship with Jim Parker creates a complex backdrop for any potential business relationship. There was a pause before she responded. I understand that perception. For clarity, my relationship with Jim began after he had initiated divorce proceedings, though I recognize the timeline may appear questionable from your perspective. I wasn't sure whether to believe this clarification, but ultimately it didn't matter. Whatever had happened between Jim and Vanessa was part of the past I was deliberately moving beyond. Regardless of the exact timeline, I'm focused on building Emerald's future without complications from my previous marriage, I explained. I appreciate your interest, but I don't think a collaboration would be appropriate at this time. I understand, she said, her tone remaining professional. If you change your mind, my door remains open. I admire what you've built with Emerald, particularly under challenging circumstances. After ending the call, I continued my walk, processing this unexpected interaction. There was something validating about Vanessa's outreach, a recognition of Emerald's growing reputation independent of my connection to Parker Design. Even someone closely associated with Jim was now approaching me as a valued potential business partner rather than Jim's ex-wife. The incident crystallized how thoroughly my professional identity had evolved. A year ago, I had been defined primarily through my relationship to Jim and Parker Design. Now I was recognized for what I had, built independently, approached for collaborations based on Emerald's work rather than any personal connections. That evening, I received an email notification that had become increasingly common. Another designer from Parker Design inquiring about opportunities at Emerald Innovation. Derek Foster had been a senior designer at Parker Design, someone I had worked with closely before my departure. His message was straightforward. Becca, I've been following Emerald's growth and am impressed with the direction you're taking. The emphasis on accessibility and adaptive interfaces aligns with my own interests, which have felt increasingly sidelined at Parker Design. I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss whether there might be a place for me at Emerald. It was the third such inquiry in 2 months. As Parker Design struggled to maintain its position after losing several key clients, Emerald's rising profile was attracting attention from designers seeking more innovative environments. I replied with a professional invitation to meet for coffee later that week, neither encouraging nor discouraging his interest until we could speak directly. While I had no desire to actively poach talent from Parker Design, that would feel unnecessarily antagonistic toward Jim, I wouldn't turn away qualified designers who approached Emerald on their own initiative. These expressions of interest from Parker Design employees represented yet another shift in the dynamic between my former and current companies, where once I had been excluded from the business I helped build. Now that business was struggling to retain talent as Emerald's reputation grew. The following day brought news that further confirmed this changing landscape. North Star Group officially selected Emerald Innovation for their interface redesign project, a contract worth $1 to $2 million over 18 months. Their decision email specifically cited our forward-thinking approach to accessibility and innovative adaptive interface solutions as key factors in their selection. Tom was ecstatic when I shared the news. This positions us perfectly in the enterprise market. Between Westwood and North Star, we've established credibility with exactly the client profile we've been targeting. And the timing is perfect for our expansion plans, I noted. We had been discussing opening a small Seattle office to better serve Washington-based clients, a significant step in Emerald's growth strategy. Should we accelerate that timeline now? Tom asked. With North Star and potentially bringing Derek on board, we could justify the additional overhead. Let's discuss it at tomorrow's strategy meeting, I suggested. I want to make sure we're expanding sustainably, not just reacting to immediate opportunities. This cautious approach to growth reflected lessons learned from observing Parker Design's trajectory. Jim had always pushed for rapid expansion, sometimes prioritizing the appearance of success over sustainable business practices. At Emerald, I was determined to build differently, making deliberate decisions based on long-term vision rather than short-term opportunities. That evening, I met with my newly formed support group for professionals managing MS while building their careers. The monthly gathering had become an important part of my routine, providing both practical advice for symptom management and the invaluable perspective of others navigating similar challenges. Lisa, a software engineer who had been diagnosed 3 years earlier, greeted me warmly. "How's the new project going? The one you mentioned last month?" "We got it," I said, unable to contain a smile. "Officially signed this morning." "Congratulations. That's huge for a company your size." "It is. And honestly, a year ago I couldn't have imagined being in this position. When I was first diagnosed, then served with divorce papers, it felt like everything was falling apart." Lisa nodded understanding. The diagnosis reveals a lot, not just about your health, but about the people in your life and your own resilience. Exactly. Jim saw my MS as a liability, a reason to exit the marriage and try to take everything we'd built together. Instead, it became the catalyst for building something better. The conversation shifted to practical matters, managing energy levels during intensive project phases, communication strategies for days when symptoms flared, technological accommodations that made work more accessible. This exchange of experiences and solutions had become invaluable as I navigated building a company while managing a chronic condition. What struck me most about these meetings was how they had transformed my perspective on my diagnosis. What Jim had viewed as a devastating weakness, this community recognized as a source of insight and innovation. Many of us were incorporating our lived experience with disability into our professional work, creating more accessible and inclusive products as a result. In Emerald's case, my personal experience with MS had directly influenced our emphasis on adaptive interfaces and accessibility features, approaches that were now distinguishing us in the marketplace and winning major clients like Westwood and North Star. The following week brought an unexpected communication, an industry interview request from Portland Business Journal for a feature on Portland's rising tech innovators. The email specifically mentioned Emerald Innovation's growing reputation for accessible design solutions and requested an interview focused on our company's approach and vision. I agreed to the interview, scheduled for the following Wednesday at Emerald's offices. As I prepared talking points about our design philosophy and growth strategy, I realized this represented another milestone in Emerald's evolution, recognition by the broader business community independent of any connection to Parker Design or my previous marriage. The journalist, Aidan Matthews, arrived promptly for the interview, equipped with surprising knowledge about Emerald's work and approach. His questions were thoughtful and technically informed, focusing on our design methodology rather than superficial business metrics. Your emphasis on accessibility seems to have anticipated market trends, he observed midway through the interview. Large enterprises are increasingly prioritizing these features, but Emerald was centered on this approach from its founding. What prompted that foresight? I considered my response carefully. It was partly personal experience. I live with MS and have firsthand understanding of how technology can either create or remove barriers. But it was also a recognition that accessible design is simply good design. Features that help users with disabilities typically improve the experience for everyone. And yet many established design firms treated accessibility as an afterthought, Aidan noted, including Parker Design Solutions, which I understand you were previously affiliated with. The reference to Parker Design was presented factually, without any hint that he knew the full personal history involved. I maintained the same professional tone in my response. Different firms have different priorities and approaches. At Emerald, we saw an opportunity to center accessibility in our process rather than treating it as a compliance checkbox. That approach has resonated with clients who understand that inclusive design reaches more users effectively. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, covering Emerald's growth, our approach to client partnerships, and our vision for the future. When Aidan asked about upcoming projects, I shared our plans for the Seattle expansion, framing it as a natural evolution of our client-centered approach. As the interview concluded, Aidan asked one final question. What advice would you give to other entrepreneurs, particularly those facing personal challenges while building their businesses? The question invited a more personal response than the others, touching on the journey that had led me to this point. I thought carefully before answering. Build something that truly matters to you, something aligned with your values and vision. When external circumstances become challenging, whether health issues, relationship changes, or market disruptions, that alignment becomes your foundation. And surround yourself with people who genuinely value your contributions and perspective. After Aidan left, Tom stopped by my office. How did the interview go? Well, I think he was surprisingly knowledgeable about design methodology, not just business metrics. That's refreshing, Tom noted. Did he ask about Parker Design or the divorce? He mentioned my previous affiliation with Parker Design, but nothing about the personal aspects. I kept the focus on Emerald's approach and vision. Good. That's the narrative that matters now. What we're building, not what happened before. He was right. The past year had been a journey from being defined by my relationship to Jim and Parker Design to establishing an independent identity through Emerald Innovation. Each milestone, the Westwood contract, the office expansion, this industry recognition, further cemented that transition. The article appeared the following week, prominently featured in Portland Business Journal's technology section. The headline read, Emerald Innovation Leads Accessible Design Revolution, with a professional photo of me in our office beside a quote highlighting our user-centered approach. The piece was thorough and substantive, focusing on Emerald's methodology and growth, while mentioning Parker Design only briefly as part of my professional background. It concluded with my advice to entrepreneurs, framed as wisdom gleaned from building a successful company while managing a chronic health condition. As I read the article, I reflected on how thoroughly my narrative had transformed. A year earlier, I had been served divorce papers while still processing my MS diagnosis, facing Jim's attempt to leave me with nothing. Now, I was being profiled as an innovative business leader, with Emerald recognized for its forward-thinking approach. What Jim had intended as an ending had instead become a beginning, the catalyst for building something more aligned with my values and vision than our joint business had ever been. The company he had tried to take from me had pushed me to create something better, something truly mine. That afternoon, I received an unexpected email from Jim, the first direct communication we'd had in months. Becca, saw the Business Journal article. Congratulations on Emerald's success. You've built something impressive. Jim, the message was brief but significant. A professional acknowledgement from the person who had once dismissed my contributions and tried to erase my role in our shared business. I considered whether to respond and what to say. After careful thought, I sent an equally brief reply. Thank you, Jim. I hope things are going well for you. It wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. Some bridges remain permanently crossed. It was simply a recognition that we had both moved forward, establishing a minimal professional courtesy that acknowledged our shared history without being defined by it. Later that week, during my regular lunch with Sarah, she noticed the article, prominently displayed on a nearby table where two business people were dining. "Look at that," she said with undisguised pride. "My sister, the tech innovator, featured in Portland Business Journal. How does it feel to see your story out there?" "It's gratifying," I admitted. "But what matters most is that it's the right story, focused on what I'm building, not what I lost." "That's what I admire most about how you've handled everything," Sarah said. "You never positioned yourself as a victim, even when you could have. You just kept building." "That was deliberate," I explained. "Playing the victim would have kept me tethered to Jim and the divorce. I wanted to define myself by what I was creating, not by what had happened to me." Sarah raised her glass in a small toast. "Well, here's to defining your own story and making it a damn good one." As we continued our lunch, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The MS diagnosis that Jim had seen as a devastating liability had actually given me valuable perspective on what matters in design and in life. The divorce he had initiated to discard me had instead freed me to build something more aligned with my values. The business he had tried to take from me had pushed me to create something better. There was a profound symmetry to it all. Each thing that was intended to diminish me had instead become a catalyst for growth, each loss transformed into an opportunity for something more authentic and aligned with my true self. 6 months after the Business Journal feature, Emerald Innovation opened its Seattle office, a sleek space overlooking Elliott Bay. The expansion coincided with securing 2 major Washington-based clients and hiring 6 new team members, including Derek Foster, who had successfully transitioned from Parker Design to lead our user research department. The official opening reception brought together clients, industry partners, and team members from both our Portland and Seattle locations. As I prepared to make brief welcoming remarks, I looked around at what we had built. Not just the physical space, but the collaborative culture, the innovative methodology, and the reputation for excellence that defined Emerald Innovation. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, addressing the gathered crowd. "This Seattle office represents not just a geographical expansion, but a milestone in Emerald's evolution. When we founded this company, we had a specific vision to create interfaces that work for everyone, regardless of ability or circumstance. That vision has resonated more profoundly than we could have anticipated." I continued, acknowledging key team members and expressing gratitude to clients who had trusted our approach. As I spoke, I realized how completely I had moved beyond the narrative of loss and recovery that had initially defined Emerald's early days. This wasn't a comeback story anymore. It was simply the story of a company growing successfully through clear vision and consistent execution. After the reception, as most guests departed, Tom joined me by the windows overlooking the bay. "Remember when we were working out of that tiny Pearl District office?" he asked, gesturing at the expansive space around us. "Did you imagine we'd be here in just 18 months? Honestly, no," I admitted. When I started Emerald, it was about creating something that was truly mine, something Jim couldn't take or diminish. I didn't anticipate how quickly it would grow beyond that initial purpose. "That's the thing about building something authentic," Tom observed. "It takes on a life beyond your original intentions." He was right. Emerald had evolved from a personal refuge into a thriving company with its own momentum and identity. What had begun as a response to Jim's dismissal of my contributions had become a business defined entirely by its own vision and values, independent of that initial catalyst. As the Seattle office became operational, I divided my time between our 2 locations, typically spending 3 days in Portland and 2 in Seattle each week. The travel created additional challenges for managing my MS symptoms, requiring more deliberate attention to rest, stress management, and medication schedules. But the expansion also brought new energy to Emerald's work, with fresh perspectives, from our Seattle team enhancing our design approach. 8 months after the Seattle opening, I received an industry award nomination that felt particularly significant, the Northwest Design Innovation Award, recognizing leaders who had made substantial contributions to the field. The nomination specifically cited Emerald's pioneering work in accessible interfaces and my leadership in promoting inclusive design principles. The award ceremony was scheduled for May at the Northwest Design Conference in Seattle, an event that typically attracted professionals from throughout the region. As the date approached, I learned that Parker Design Solutions had also received a nomination in the Corporate Design Excellence category, meaning Jim would likely be attending the same ceremony. It would be our first public professional encounter, since the divorce was finalized nearly 2 years earlier. Though we had occasionally exchanged brief, courteous emails regarding industry matters, we had not been in the same room since that final conversation outside the courtroom. I discussed the situation with Tom as we prepared our presentation for the conference. "It's not an issue," I assured him. "We've both moved forward professionally. If we encounter each other, we'll be cordial." "I'm not worried about cordiality," Tom replied. "I'm more concerned about the narrative people might construct seeing you both there. Industry events generate gossip. Then we control that narrative through our actions," I said simply. "Professional courtesy, focus on the work, no personal drama." The conference opened on a bright Thursday morning, with attendees from design firms throughout the Pacific Northwest gathering at Seattle's Convention Center. Emerald had a significant presence, with 6 team members presenting across various panels and workshops. Our booth in the exhibition hall showcased our latest adaptive interface innovations, attracting steady interest throughout the day. I was reviewing my notes for an afternoon panel on accessibility standards when I first saw Jim across the exhibition hall. He was speaking with a small group near the Parker Design booth, looking much as he had when we were married. Confident, engaging, dressed in the understated business casual style he preferred for industry events. For a moment, our eyes met across the crowded space. He nodded slightly, a minimal acknowledgement that I returned equally briefly before returning to my conversation with a potential client. There was no dramatic tension in the exchange, just the simple recognition of 2 professionals who shared a history but had moved beyond it. Later that afternoon, we ended up in the same panel discussion, Future Trends in Interface Design, with 5 panelists representing different perspectives in the field. Seated at opposite ends of the panel table, we each presented our views professionally, occasionally acknowledging each other's points when relevant, but never drawing attention to our previous connection. It was a subtle dance of professional courtesy, maintaining the focus on design principles rather than personal history. From the audience perspective, there would have been no indication that the representatives from Emerald Innovation and Parker Design had any connection beyond normal industry familiarity. After the panel, as attendees gathered for the evening reception preceding the award ceremony, Elena from North Star approached me with an amused expression. As I stood on the balcony of my new office in downtown Portland, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and pink hues, I couldn't help but reflect on how thoroughly my life had transformed in just 3 years. "You and Jim Parker handled that panel impressively," Elena said. "Most people in the audience probably had no idea about your history." "We're both professionals," I replied simply. "The work deserves to be the focus, not personal matters." Elena nodded appreciatively. "That maturity is rare. I've seen industry rivalries become embarrassingly personal at these events." She glanced across the room where Jim was engaged in conversation with several attendees. "Though I have to say, Emerald's approach to accessibility is clearly resonating more strongly. With the audience, you've positioned yourselves ahead of the curve." Her observation was accurate. Throughout the conference, Emerald's presentations had consistently drawn larger crowds than Parker Designs, with more engaged questions and follow-up conversations. The industry was increasingly recognizing the value of the inclusive design, principles we had championed from the beginning. As the evening progressed, I circulated through the reception, connecting with colleagues and potential clients. The networking was comfortable and productive, focused entirely on professional matters without the undercurrent of personal tension I might have expected given Jim's presence. At one point, I found myself at the same refreshment table as Jim, an encounter that couldn't be naturally avoided without appearing awkward. "Your presentation on adaptive interfaces was impressive," he said, maintaining a professional tone. "The case studies demonstrated the principles effectively." "Thank you," I replied. "Your team's work on motion design is showing real innovation as well." It was a brief, courteous exchange between industry peers, nothing more personal or pointed. As we each moved back to separate conversations, I realized how completely the dynamic between us had transformed. The emotional charge that had defined our interactions during the divorce had dissipated, replaced by the measured respect of professional colleagues. The awards ceremony began at 8, with various categories celebrating excellence in design across the Pacific Northwest. When the Innovation Award category was announced, I felt a curious calm. The nomination itself was meaningful recognition, regardless of the outcome. The Northwest Design Innovation Award recognizes individuals whose work has fundamentally advanced design methodology and implementation in our region, the presenter explained. This year's recipient has pioneered approaches to accessible design that have not only served users with disabilities, but have elevated user experience for everyone. The award goes to Rebecca Morgan of Emerald Innovation Group. The announcement brought warm applause from the audience as I made my way to the stage. From the podium, I could see my team's enthusiastic response and, more distantly, Jim's polite applause. His expression was unreadable from that distance, but his participation in the professional courtesy was noted. "Thank you for this recognition," I began. "At Emerald Innovation, we believe that designing for accessibility isn't a specialization or an add-on. It's fundamental to creating technology that truly serves human needs. This award belongs to our entire team, whose commitment to inclusive design principles has made our work possible." Later in the ceremony, Parker Design won in the user interface category for a project I recognized as having been initiated during my time with the company. When Jim accepted the award, he similarly focused on the work itself and his team's contributions, maintaining the professional tone that had characterized our interactions throughout the event. At the conclusion of the ceremony, as attendees began to disperse, Tom approached with champagne glasses in hand. "Congratulations," he said, handing me one. "Well-deserved recognition." "For all of us," I corrected. including the nearby Emerald team members in the toast. This was truly a collaborative achievement. As we celebrated, I noticed Jim watching from across the room. After a moment's hesitation, he approached our group. "Congratulations, Rebecca," he said, using my full name rather than the more familiar Becca he had used during our marriage. "The Innovation Award is significant recognition." "Thank you, Jim," I replied evenly. "Congratulations to Parker Design on the UI award as well." There was a brief, awkward pause before Tom smoothly extended his hand to Jim. The Highland project was impressive work. The motion studies particularly stood out. Jim accepted the professional olive branch, and the conversation shifted to design techniques and industry trends. For several minutes, representatives from Emerald and Parker Design engaged in normal collegial discussion, the kind that happens constantly at industry events between respectful competitors. It was, in its way, the final resolution of our personal and professional separation. This ability to inhabit the same industry space without tension or drama, to acknowledge each other's work objectively while maintaining clear boundaries between our separate companies and lives. The following week brought another milestone when Emerald Innovation was featured in a national technology magazine's cover story on Design Leaders Transforming Tech Accessibility. The 8-page spread included extensive interviews with me and several team members, photographs of our design process, and case studies highlighting our most innovative projects. The article's introduction struck a particular chord. When Rebecca Morgan founded Emerald Innovation Group, accessible design was widely considered a specialized niche, something implemented primarily for regulatory compliance rather than competitive advantage. 3 years later, Morgan's approach has helped transform industry perception, demonstrating that designing for users with disabilities creates superior interfaces for everyone. The Emerald approach, as it's become known, has influenced design practices far beyond the company's project portfolio. Reading this characterization of Emerald's impact, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. What had begun partly as a response to Jim's dismissal of my contributions had evolved into something with genuine significance for the design field and, more importantly, for users who had previously been marginalized by inaccessible technology. 3 weeks after the conference, I received an unexpected email from Jim. "I've been reflecting on Emerald's success and your leadership in accessible design. While our professional paths have diverged, I want to acknowledge that your approach to inclusivity has influenced the entire industry, including Parker Design. The principles you championed when we worked together, which I admittedly undervalued at the time, have proven visionary." The message represented something I had never expected. A genuine acknowledgement of my professional contributions and vision, something Jim had consistently diminished during our marriage and business partnership. It wasn't an apology for the divorce or his behavior during that difficult time, but it was a professional recognition that carried its own significance. After careful consideration, I replied simply, "Thank you for this acknowledgement, Jim. I'm encouraged to see the industry embracing accessibility as a fundamental approach rather than an afterthought. In the end, what matters most is creating technology that works for everyone, regardless of which company champions these principles." As spring bloomed across Portland, bringing cherry blossoms and renewed energy to the city, Emerald Innovation officially opened its expanded headquarters in downtown Portland and announced a new Seattle office to serve our growing Washington client base. The company had grown to 32 employees, with a portfolio of clients spanning healthcare, finance, education, and technology sectors. At the opening reception, surrounded by team members, clients, and industry colleagues, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. Jim's attempt to leave me with nothing after my MS diagnosis had unknowingly set in motion events that led to something more meaningful than our joint business had ever been. The divorce that was meant to diminish me had instead revealed strengths I hadn't fully recognized. The business he had tried to take from me had pushed me to build something more aligned with my values and vision. A company that prioritized accessibility and inclusion in ways Parker Design never had. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Sarah found me on the office balcony overlooking the Willamette River. "Remember when you stayed in my guest room right after he served those papers?" she asked, handing me a glass of champagne. "You were so methodical even then, making lists and plans while most people would have fallen apart." "I didn't have the luxury of falling apart," I reminded her. "With the MS diagnosis and Jim trying to take everything, I had to focus on what I could control." "And look what you've built," she said, gesturing at the vibrant office space behind. "Us? Not just a successful company, but one that's actually changing how technology works for people with disabilities. That's a kind of success Jim can't claim, no matter how Parker Design evolves." She was right. The true measure of Emerald's success wasn't financial metrics or industry awards, though we had achieved both. It was the impact we were having on making technology more accessible for everyone. Work that reflected my deepest values and utilized my greatest strengths. 3.5 years after receiving those divorce papers while still processing my MS diagnosis, I stood at the podium of the National Accessibility and Technology Conference as keynote speaker. Looking out at the audience of over 1,000 designers, developers, and executives, I felt a profound sense of purpose. When we design with accessibility as a fundamental principle rather than an afterthought, I told them, we create technology that works better for everyone. This isn't about compliance or checking boxes. It's about recognizing that human abilities exist on a spectrum, and truly effective design accounts for that diversity. As I outlined Emerald's approach and the measurable benefits of accessible design, I noticed a familiar face in the audience. Jim was seated near the back, taking notes with evident concentration. His presence wasn't threatening or disruptive, just another industry professional seeking to learn and adapt to evolving best practices. After the keynote, during the networking reception, he approached briefly. "Excellent presentation," said, maintaining the professional courtesy that had characterized our interaction since the divorce. "Your perspective on designing for cognitive accessibility was particularly valuable." "Thank you," I replied. "It's encouraging to see these principles gaining industry-wide adoption." He nodded, understanding the unspoken implication that these were the same principles he had dismissed when we worked together. "Parker Design has been implementing many of these approaches in our recent projects," he acknowledged. "The results speak for themselves in terms of user engagement and satisfaction." We spoke for a few minutes about industry trends before naturally moving to separate conversations. There was no tension, no lingering resentment, just two professionals who shared a history but now operated in separate spheres. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how thoroughly circumstances had transformed. The woman who had once received divorce papers while still reeling from an MS diagnosis was now a recognized industry leader, building a company that reflected her values and vision rather than accommodating someone else's limitations. Jim had thought he was leaving me with nothing. He couldn't have known about Emerald Innovation, the company I'd been quietly building under my maiden name while he dismissed my contributions to our joint business. But more importantly, he couldn't have anticipated the determination and clarity that emerged when the constraints of our marriage were removed. The business I had hidden wasn't just financially successful. It was meaningful in ways Parker Design had never been. We were creating technology that genuinely improved lives, particularly for users with disabilities who had been marginalized by conventional design approaches. This wasn't just professional success. It was alignment between my work and my deepest values, between external recognition and internal fulfillment. It was the kind of success that couldn't be measured solely in revenue or company size, but in the impact we created for users who previously faced barriers in accessing technology. Jim had underestimated me in our marriage, our business partnership, and our divorce. But his greatest miscalculation wasn't about my professional capabilities or resilience. It was his failure to recognize that sometimes, when you think you're leaving someone with nothing, You're actually giving them an opportunity to build something better than they ever could have created within the constraints you imposed. Emerald. Innovation wasn't just my response to Jim's betrayal. It was the company I was always meant to build, the work I was always meant to do. He hadn't taken everything from me. He had inadvertently freed me to create something that truly reflected who I was and what I valued. In that recognition was the deepest form of closure and the most genuine form of success, not defined by comparison to Jim or Parker Design, but by alignment with my authentic self and the impact Emerald created in making technology more accessible for everyone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.